This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And make sure to order Jamie Glazov's new critically acclaimed jihadist psychopath, How He Is Charming, Seducing, and Devouring Us. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, Live Not by Lies, a manual for Christian dissidents. With us this evening, Rod Dreher, a senior editor at the American Conservative. He is the best-selling author of The Benedict Option, and his new book is Live Not by Lies, a manual for Christian dissidents. And it has just made the New York Times bestseller list. Rod, what an honor and a privilege to have you here.
Jamie, thank you for inviting me on.
Tell us first about this New York Times bestseller list.
Well, my book, Live Not by Lies, was just published on September 29th, and it sold very well. I was on Tucker Carlson the night before it came out, and that really got the word out. And interestingly enough, I've sold twice as many copies in a week of Live Not by Lies as I did The Benedict Option, but it's twice as far down the Times bestseller list. But they say that it takes a lot to get onto the bestseller list in the fall. But I'm just so grateful for all the support the book has had. And it's getting these big sales because, Jamie, so many people in this country understand that we are in an emergency situation. We're in a very critical situation. This is not normal times, and we have to prepare for what's coming.
Absolutely, and what a good sign that people are interested in this book. It's such a high volume. What number did it reach on Amazon? Was it quite high there, right?
Yeah, on the day it was published, September 29th, it hit number one.
Wow, number one. That is fantastic. Well, congratulations, Rod. I carefully read your book. My parents were Soviet dissidents. They were dissidents in the former Soviet Union.
Right, I know that. That's why I was so interested to do your show.
Yeah, and thank you. And among other things, we were persecuted for our Christianity. My godfather, Alexander Min, who baptized me in our Moscow apartment, was murdered by the KGB.
He's your godfather. I know who he is. That's incredible.
Yeah, and so you can understand that your book has a very sacred significance to me, so thank you for writing it. And so let us begin. Why don't we just start with why you wrote Live Not by Lies?
Jamie, 5 years ago, I received a phone call from a stranger. He is a doctor at the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. He got my number from a mutual friend. He said, "Sir, I feel like I have to tell somebody this. My elderly mother was born in Czechoslovakia, raised under communism, spent 4 years in a prison for her Christian faith. She immigrated to America, married my father, and here we are. She's very old now, and she's telling me, son, the things I'm seeing happen in America today remind me of what I left behind." Well, I thought, Jamie, that was kind of alarmist. But when I started checking with people I knew who had defected from the Soviet bloc, they said the same thing. And the more people I spoke to, who had come to this country and to Canada and to the UK from the Soviet bloc, every one of them had the same message. And if you talk to them long enough, they'll get really angry because Americans aren't taking them seriously.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And for us, Rod, obviously for our family, for me, that this was always on our mind and our soul. And so as I grew up in the West, we definitely see this. You know, it's this utopian virus, and it's infected our country here in the United States. And so, Rod, you and also at an accelerating rate, as you write about. Rod, you go and talk to the people who suffered under communism, to emigres from the Soviet Union, and to those who were persecuted under that barbaric regime. Tell us, let's start with this. I was very interested in Father Tomislav Kolakovic. Tell us a little bit about him and why he was such an important figure to you, and also in connection to writing this book.
Right. Well, one of the things I wanted to do with this book is not only to explain to Americans in general, but especially American Christians, what's happening in this country and why emigres see it as pre-totalitarian, but also to go over to the Eastern Bloc and to Russia to talk to people to get advice about what we Americans can do to prepare. Father Tomislav Kolakovic was a Jesuit priest from Croatia who was doing anti-Nazi work in 1943 in Zagreb. He got a tip that the Gestapo was coming for him, so he slipped out of the country, went to Slovakia, his mother's homeland, and got a job at the Catholic University in Bratislava. He changed his name to Kolakovic to hide out from the Nazis. While he was there, he told the Catholic students, the good news is the Germans are going to lose this war. The bad news is the communists are going to be ruling this country when it's over. And the first thing they're going to do is come for the church. So we've got to be ready for it. So what Father Kolakovic did was organize student groups, prayer groups, who would come together not only to pray, but to study scripture and to talk about what was happening in their country and what their response ought to be as faithful Christians. They spread these prayer groups all throughout the country in a network. The Catholic bishops of Slovakia at the time told Kolakovic he was being an alarmist, but Kolakovic had studied in the Vatican, studied Russian culture. He loved Russia, and he wanted to be a missionary to Russia to try to turn it from communism. And he told the bishops, you don't understand, and he kept working. Sure enough, Jamie, after the Second World War, when the Iron Curtain fell over Czechoslovakia, they came after the priest. But Father Kolakovic, this group he set up, this network, they became the backbone of the underground church. So I've dedicated this book to his memory. I'm not a Catholic, I'm Orthodox, but I've dedicated the book to his memory because I think he is a model for what we have to start doing in this country.
Right. And you write about, of course, all the persecution, the totalitarianism, but you very much have a Christian emphasis, the persecution of Christians, and just of the Christian story and of the narrative, and for us Christians, because there's so much evil here in communism that there's no coincidence. Of course they persecute everybody, but they especially go after the Christians, as also your book shows, right?
That's exactly right, because they saw, quite rightly, the Christian faith and Christian people as the greatest obstacle to their domination. And I think it's also no coincidence that here in the West today, faithful Christians are seen by the progressives as the greatest obstacle to their domination of our society. And look, we also have to be honest here. The Bible tells us that we are really at war with principalities and powers. I don't think you have to be a mystic to see that there's such an evil spirit at work, a spirit of destruction. It was there in the Soviet Union, and it started to come here. I was not surprised, Jamie, and you probably know this. I was not surprised to learn that in the early part of the 20th century in Russia, among the elites, a lot of them looked up to Satan as a liberator. You know, they weren't necessarily religious themselves, but they saw Satan as the bold individualist and the one who was going to liberate them. Well, you see what happened.
Well, I also just did a show with Paul Kengor about Marx and the devil. So we kind of have a good idea where Marxism stems from, and it's no coincidence in terms of what you also document, what they did to Christians like Richard Wurmbrand and other believers in prison in communism. So Jesus Christ poses the greatest threat, of course, to these diabolical powers, so they hate him the most and persecute his followers the most, right?
That's right. That's right. And the witness of Christians in Russia, in the Eastern Bloc under communism is so powerful, incredibly powerful, and their stories are almost entirely ignored and even forgotten here in the West. And not only in the West, but also in some of the Eastern Bloc countries. This is what astonished me. When I was in Poland, for example, doing some reporting for this book, talking to older people who lived through it, they're so discouraged that so many of the young don't have any interest in these stories. They see the history of the resistance against communism as just a burden to be shirked off so they can get on with their lives of being good consumers.
Absolutely. What a success the left has achieved in the education system and what it's done. Because look, what we know about what Lenin did, the Red Terror, about what Stalin did, and Maoist Cultural Revolution, Castro's Cuba, Vietnam, the Pol Pot, Khmer Rouge killing fields, more than 100 million lives just decimated in the 20th century. Gulag Archipelago, what an important book to read. And you talk to young people today, so many of them, as we know, support Bernie Sanders. You also point out in your book, you were talking, to the best of my memory, to this female leftist, and you were asking her, do you even know about the Gulag? And she just had no idea, never read anything about it.
Yeah, she said to me that, she said, isn't communism a great idea? Isn't that wonderful, the brotherhood of man? And I looked at her, 26 years old, college educated. I said, do you know about the Gulag? No, what's that? And I'll have to tell you, I was in Moscow in the lobby of the Metropole Hotel last fall, interviewing Alexander Ogorodnikov, who is one of the great dissidents of the late Soviet period. And after I finished interviewing him, I'd been taking notes on my computer. I went over to the bar at the hotel to pay the bill. And the young waitress there, she was maybe 23, 24. She said, who is that man you were talking to? I said, he's one of the greatest men in Russia. Well, what do you mean? I said, he's Alexander Ogorodnikov. He survived Soviet prison. He was beaten and tortured for his Christian beliefs. She said, the Gulag? I think I've heard of something like that, right there in Moscow.
Yeah, it's just tragic. I remember for a while when I was teaching in university, I remember first-year students, second-year students had no idea. A lot of them had never heard of Stalin. Can you imagine? I mean, what are they teaching in high school?
They're not teaching any of this, and nor is our media, Jamie. I mean, the kids today, they know so much more about the Nazi era than they do about the communist era. They should know about Nazi totalitarianism, absolutely. But that's not the only totalitarianism of the 20th century. Tens of millions died under communism, but it's gone right down the memory hole. And that itself is a totalitarian tactic, just to erase history so nobody knows about it and people are therefore easier to control.
Absolutely. There were no Nuremberg-style trials for communists. And so, racial hatred, of course, evil, and needs to be discredited and fought against and all that stuff. But class hatred, because the left believes in those ideas and because the leftist intellectuals believe in those ideas, they want to cover up what those ideas led to. And they've succeeded in doing that, right?
They have. One of the most interesting things I found in my research was a passage I came across written by Martin Latsis. He was one of the early leaders of the Cheka, the precursor to the KGB. And he was talking about Red Terror. And he told his agents when they went out into Russia during the Red Terror period, right after the revolution, he said, go find out who the people are in terms of their class, the bourgeoisie, the kulaks, the rich farmers, and so on. Don't judge them by what they've done. Don't judge them by what they've said. Judge them by who they are, their class identity, and kill them. That, he said, is the essence of the Red Terror. We can see the same sort of thing now in our identity politics, where the social justice warriors are drawing distinctions between people, not based on the content of your character or what you say, but based on your identity, your racial identity, your gender identity, your sexuality, that sort of thing. And they're using the same logic of the Bolsheviks to bring that sort of hatred here. One of the most quoted statements of Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago was what he learned in prison, that the line between good and evil runs not between classes, but right down the center of every human heart. Well, we have to reacquaint ourselves with that vital truth right now, because the social justice warriors are doing the same thing the Bolsheviks did, dividing people on the basis of identity.
Yes, absolutely, Rod. Thank you. And let me switch over to Solzhenitsyn for a minute, and you point out so many important things, and thank you for that. And so a lot of the people who survived communism that I spoke to growing up and still to this day, many things that they say, including one thing, they say that they lived. One thing is believing the lie. One thing is listening to lies. Another thing is telling lies to yourself. And you talk about how Solzhenitsyn had a very important message in February 1974 when he was in the greatest trouble. I think that was just, during when they were going after him and right before he left. But he had a message which was "Live not by lies." And that's the title of your book. Tell us about this message that Solzhenitsyn had.
Yeah, this was in the last message he sent out to his followers in Russia before they expelled him. Mm-hmm. And he told them, look, things look very bad for us. We can't do a thing against this totalitarian government. But the one thing we can do is to refuse to assent to the lies that upholds this entire system. As long as we maintain our integrity and we refuse to let them think that they have conquered us, to let them think that we agree with them, if we can say no to these lies, then we will have gained a really important moral victory. We will have saved our souls. And if enough people refuse to go along with the system, refuse to be quiet and keep their head down just to keep their jobs or just to keep their respectability, then maybe this country will change, said Solzhenitsyn. He said people who don't do that, people who do want to keep their head down and conform not to cause trouble, he compared them to a herd of cattle and said they don't deserve freedom. This essay of his, Live Not by Lies, it's a short essay. You can find it anywhere on the internet. It's one of the most important things anybody can read. I saw the writer Barry Weiss today sent out a tweet saying that whenever any young person comes to her, she's not a Christian and it's not even really a conservative, but she said whenever anybody comes to her, a young person overwhelmed by anxiety and fear from this cancel culture, the first thing she does is send them to that Solzhenitsyn essay. It's prophetic, and it matters to us right here, right now.
Absolutely. And Rod, you talk about how our society and so many people are sleepwalking through the erosion of our freedoms. So it's not a totalitarianism that even needs to come and hit us over the head with a hammer. You talk about soft totalitarianism that's sneakier. And so one of your themes is that there's more of a brave new world happening than 1984. And so, I'm the editor of Front Page Magazine. Over the years, we have certain people that will write an essay for us and they'll say, hey, please, I'm in academia. Can I use a pseudonym, please? Because they'll lose their job. And we can just go on and on about people in Hollywood that have to hide their political views, in academia, in just everywhere we look around. There's this censorship going on and people are terrified. But you point out, Rod, it's fascinating. There's a combination happening right now. There's obviously the leftist indoctrination, and then there's this comfort with materialism, with technology. I mean, you look at the younger people today just taking selfies, Instagram, they're getting their tattoos. A lot of them are just like robots and have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, that's true. And, that's an important distinction between the hard totalitarianism of the Soviet model, that's George Orwell, 1984, controlling people through the infliction of pain and terror. That's one model. But the model that we're moving into very quickly is the Brave New World model of Aldous Huxley, where the state or the regime control people by manipulating their pleasures and their entertainment and sex and drugs and constant entertainment, and they turn people docile. That is happening here right now, and it's not just the state that's doing it. If we are only looking to the government as the source of totalitarianism, we're missing something fundamental here. It is more of a regime. It does involve some aspects of the state, but it also involves universities. It involves the Hollywood, the entertainment system. It involves the media. It is involving some churches. All of these things are sort of coalescing together, not with any sort of well thought out system of control, but slowly, we've become so soft and accustomed to comfort that any idea that we might have to face any sort of suffering, we can't deal with it. I mean, you try to take away a smartphone from a teenager and they'll flip out. Well, this is a form of slavery. One thing I heard constantly from the former dissidents in the Soviet bloc is that if you are not prepared to suffer, then you will be a slave. The only way that you can stand up for the truth and live in truth is to be willing to suffer for your views. Solzhenitsyn said that, Václav Havel said that, and every one of these dissidents say the same thing.
Yeah, and that's very troubling, especially in the context now of what we see, how quick people are to give up their freedoms for safety with this whole COVID lockdown hysteria that we know is going on. So, Rod, absolutely, so profound. You talk about the comfort with hedonistic comforts, this therapeutic culture, then how the technology and consumerism are hastening in the corporate surveillance state. Very much of what we know that was happening in China. But it's here. It's here, Rod. I mean, if we just even look at social media, what's not allowed to be said on Facebook, what's taken down on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. Conservatives can really not say anything in a lot of ways about the truth on social media, right? And that's a reflection of what's going on in Hollywood and academia.
It's all part of it. And I think what we're going to see here, whether or not President Trump gets reelected, I think that any president can do very little to fight the blob. I think politics are really important, but what's happening here is so much bigger. I think what's going to happen is the left is going to get more and more anxious about what's happening, about dissent, and will use its powers within the surveillance capitalism model. That is to say, big companies who are monitoring everything that we send off of smartphones, off of laptops. I mean, it sounds crazy, tinfoil hat crazy, but it's really happening now. And it's not happening behind the scenes. They're doing this openly with our agreement. Every time you put an app in your phone, you're agreeing to allow them to take data. And they're going to use this data like the Chinese are using it right now for a social credit system, where they're not going to send the secret police to your door to haul you off to prison for being a dissenter. They're just going to make it really hard for you to keep your job, to get credit at the bank, and so on and so forth. It's coming here, and people are preparing themselves for it by welcoming into their houses things like an Alexa speaker, which listens to you and sends that data back. I write in the book about how scientists are now developing, using artificial intelligence, a smart television that can read the faces of the people who watch it, and using artificial intelligence, monitor their emotional reactions when they watch a particular commercial or something on TV, so the advertisers can better know how to make ads that appeal to them. Well, look, if somebody came to us from the government and said, "We're here from the government, we would like to put this kind of device in your house," you would know exactly what that was. That was 1984. But if it's sold to us as consumer convenience, well, we Americans will not only accept it, but we'll pay cash money to let people put that in. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something going on here. And for us Christians, what we know about the Bible and the Antichrist, look, we don't, of course we don't know. It could be a year, could be 5 years, could be 100 years. Of course we don't know. Only God knows. But the signs, in terms of what you're talking about, are very, very creepy and alarming in terms of what you just said, this overpowering surveillance state. And Rod, you talk about Hannah Arendt, the origins of totalitarianism, and when she talks about loneliness. And that's very much like, you think that social media is bringing us together, but so many things happening right now. It's very interesting. COVID, the lockdowns, put the mask on, then stay at home, stay at home, stay at home. We want to stay safe. Meanwhile, BLM and Antifa are destroying the country. We have to stay at home. The same time with social media, everybody's disconnected and lonely. Something's going on here, right?
Well, yeah, but there was mass loneliness even before the COVID thing happened. And we were seeing this in social science work and psychological research showing that since the advent of smartphones, depression and mental illness has shot straight up, usually with young people. There's something about the technology itself, and of course it's been amplified during COVID, but the technology itself separates people and makes them feel isolated and terrified. And Hannah Arendt said that this was the primary factor in the coming of totalitarianism, both to Russia and in Germany, because you had masses of people who were separated from each other and who had no sense of hope beyond what they could see in front of their face. And they were looking for somebody to give them a sense of hope and solidarity and purpose in life. This is where the Bolsheviks stepped in. This is where the Nazis stepped in. And I fear that something like that is going to happen here. We look at the young people in our country today, the people under 40, when they take polls of them to find out where they stand on free speech, freedom of religion, the sort of freedoms that most Americans have just always taken for granted. So many of them don't support it. And they, I think, are being primed right now by technology and by the habits that come out of this technology to hand over their political agency in exchange for a sense of confidence, for a sense of comfort. And I should also say that Václav Benda, he's also one of the heroes of my book, a Czech dissident who was a Christian, he recognized that the way that these totalitarian communist governments kept people in power or kept people under their thumb was to make them feel like they were isolated, like there was nobody else there for them. So the thing he said, even under communism, that people should do is get together face to face to remind each other of who we are, that we're human beings, we're neighbors, we're friends. We're not just these cogs that the government controls.
Absolutely, Rod. And you also talk about how the left has captured the institutions of bourgeois society, the corporate America, etc. And once it got corporate America onto the LGBT thing, I mean, they've succeeded in so many ways. Look, it's really accelerating, Rod. Like, I'll come home and just turn the TV on. I'm here in LA, and it'll switch right away. It turns on right away to channel 2, SoCal or whatever it is. But I just turn the TV on, it goes to that channel, and it's 24/7. It's like a Stalinist propaganda film. When I turn on the channel, it's impossible that they're ever talking about something that's not about homosexuality, lesbianism, Trump is evil, the nuclear family's bad. It's nonstop. It's nonstop. You just turn it on, and it's that identity politics, attack on America. It's absolutely nonstop. There's like a Stalinist propaganda film on every channel, in every Hollywood movie. Obviously, we know what's going on at Netflix now with cuties or whatever it is, all that pedophilia, trans, homosexuality, the attack on the nuclear family. This is just nonstop now. They're just drilling it into everybody's head, right?
In my book, I quote this Hungarian man, Tamás Shai, who said that growing up in the 50s and 60s in communist Hungary, he said there was constant propaganda, and the message of every film was that anything old and traditional was bad, that we had to forget about it all, to get rid of it. And if they put that out of their memory, and if everybody put it out of their shared memory, they were easier to control. This is what totalitarians do. And this is something that your family certainly knows from your experience, that in the Soviet Union, there was nothing that was not politicized. Early in the Soviet period, in 1924, the Soviet Chess Club was trying desperately to keep chess outside of politics. They published a statement saying, we have to have chess for chess's sake. But a commissar wrote and said, no, comrades. In the revolution, everything must serve the revolution. So we can't have chess for chess's sake. Everything has to be politicized. This is classic totalitarianism. And it comes to mind, Jamie, when you turn on sports, which used to be an apolitical, unifying phenomenon in this country. Not anymore. It's politicized too. You can't escape it.
Absolutely. And in our universities, I know a lot of people in academia, and they're just terrified. And you write about this too. There's a professor that told you that you know, in terms of job applicants, there's going to have to be some kind of pledge to diversity or whatever it is. Just overall, you have to raise your fist and say Black Lives Matter in whatever metaphorical way. And something very totalitarian descending on us. Our time is running out, Rod. Let's talk about what you spoke about also very much, is that there's hope, and you stress that it's even in the little things. Sometimes not just even repeating a lie, sometimes and maybe not even having a Marxist poster in, you know, in your house or whatever it is. Tell us in this last quick segment what people who love freedom can do.
Well, there's several things you can do, and the book is full of advice, practical advice from these people. But one of the things that really struck me, Jamie, was the importance of small groups of people getting together, people who do love freedom, people who love God, getting together and sharing that experience with each other. I talked to a man named Viktor Popkov in Moscow, who was part of the Christian group in Moscow in the early 70s. And he said that just getting together with other believers to pray and just to laugh with each other and sing hymns, knowing that the KGB was surrounding them outside, but they felt that they had real freedom being together. But the most important thing we can do is study the stories of the martyrs and understand that suffering itself is necessary, but it doesn't have to defeat us. If we can accept this suffering as a gift in the same spirit that Solzhenitsyn said, "Bless you, prison, for coming into my life," because it brought him closer to God and to the truth. If we can do that and turn our suffering around and use it as a way to find joy and hope and companionship and comradeship and holiness even, then it will be worth it.
Amen. Thank you, Rod. And we know that Americans, people in the West in general, they've become very uncomfortable with that. You know, all this comfort that they want, etc. But as you write about as well, us Christians understand there's that mystery of suffering of Christ on the cross, and also how he told his followers that we will have to suffer, but we have to celebrate also in that period of suffering, because we know that there's a tremendous blessing in it as well, right?
You know, we Orthodox Christians call Lent a time of bright sadness because it's a time of immense suffering, or remembering the suffering of Christ, and a time of repentance and fasting for us. But it's called bright because we know that the resurrection is coming. Every single person I talked to, Jamie, in the Eastern Bloc, not a single one of them thought they would live to see the end of communism, but they did in their lifetime. They resisted it because it was the right thing to do, because they loved Christ and they loved the truth more than they loved the lies, and they lived to see it fall.
Exactly. And so there's this, when we talk about this, it could be misunderstood. It doesn't mean that we're saying to be inactive. We're just saying that suffering is part of it. It doesn't mean we lay down and do nothing. It's just suffering is a part of it, praying. But there's also, as you say, resistance, being part of the counterculture, or, you know, if that's what we want to call it now. But being in, yeah, absolutely, and be involved and still do the right thing and to be active. Rod, thank you so much. For those people who are on the edge of their seat right now, very much inspired by you and that want to support you and learn more about you and your book, where can they find you?
Well, I blog every day at theamericanconservative.com. I have a blog that's read by over 1 million people every month. I write all kinds of essays there, usually about religion and politics and culture, sometimes about travel and food. But that's where I am every day, and I'm on Twitter at Rod Dreher.
Fantastic. Under a minute, but it deserves an hour. But just give us your final message.
Well, my final message is be not afraid, because the people who have gone before us in living memory in the Eastern Bloc and Russia, they saw real life. They lived in the shadow of Mordor, but they came through it. One of the most important messages from my book came from a woman in Czechoslovakia, a dissident, Kamila Bendova, who raised a big Catholic family under communism. And she said, one of the things that I did to help them was I read a lot of Tolkien to them. I said, why Tolkien? She said, because we knew that Mordor was real. And we knew the stories in this book was also our story. So I think that one thing people can do is fill themselves and the minds of their children with things that are good, true, and beautiful, because goodness, truth, beauty, and mercy and justice will triumph in the end, but it will triumph through us. It will triumph through us when we refuse to let the lie come through us.
So profound and beautiful, Rod. Thank you very much. Look, on many levels, this is the most important book right now. Thank you so much for writing it, Rod. Thank you for everything that you do, and keep up the fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie, so much. And God bless your family for what they went through. And thank you for bearing witness even today.
Thank you. And Rod, thank you for shining a light also, of course, on the persecuted. Just such a crucial thing to me, and also just means a lot to my family. So thank you very much.
Well, I hope one thing you can do in your future podcasts is put these people on, the people your family knows, the people who are here, who got to the West, and who have their eyes wide open and who are trying to help the rest of us see what's really happening. It's just an important thing.
Absolutely. Rod Dreher, thank you so much for joining the Glazov Gang.
Thanks, Jamie. God bless.
Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, live not by lies. Look it up right now. Live Not by Lies. Go to Amazon.com. Rod Dreher. Get the book. And we'll see you soon on the Glazov Gang. Good night.